All right, so the goal of this video is to talk a little bit more in depth about the string data type. As we're doing that, we're also going to look at a little bit more closely at the print function because a lot of times when we're interacting with strings, a lot of times we're printing things out because we might be using strings to debug our program as we're going along. So we will talk a little bit more about the print statement, and we're going to talk about how we can format strings to be essentially printed in a nice way. All right, so if we recall, we've got a variable. All right, this is how we can define a variable. I'm just going to go ahead and define this as hello world. Oops, if I can spell correctly. And we'll put a couple of exclamation points at the end of that. All right, so I've got this variable. It's a string, right? We can check that with type. All right, so we've got this string type variable myvar. All right, and one thing I do want to show you, so now if we've got this myvar, I'm sorry, I had something apparently in the clipboard, so there we go, myvar. I did want to show you that we have a lot of different methods, and this is true not just of strings, and it will be true of other things as we look at third-party libraries and whatnot. They have objects, and a lot of times there's methods or attributes of that object that we can access that will allow us to do things on that object. All right, so to see that, I've got my myvar. It's a string type, okay? And then if I were to hit dot and hit tab, right, we notice that we get a list of things that come up, right? And you notice, so I've got this like this count, and then it's a function. We got all these different types of things. So these are methods that are defined on our string. So when we have something with a type of string, now we have methods that we can use to modify that string. All right, so let's just play around with a couple of these. Let's look at this capitalize. And if I hit that left parenthesis, hold down shift, hit tab. All right, this tells us what we can do with this. So this is returning that docstring. This says, okay, well, this will be a capitalized version of the string. More specifically, it makes the first character have uppercase and the rest lowercase. So if we run this, right, we go hello world. Notice that the W here is lowercase. So this would be like us capitalizing a sentence, okay? All right. And let's actually push this a little bit further. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to restart and clear my kernel. Restart and clear all outputs. I'm going to say this is fun. All right, so hello world, this is fun. I'm going to go back to my var. All right, the one thing I want you to note is when you run the capitalize here, it's only capitalizing the first letter in that string, right? So we see, even though this is technically, I guess, two statements, two sentences, that first T there is not capitalized. All right, so there's a few other methods. So I'm just going to leave my var.capitalize there. I did that dot tab. We can look and we say that we've got a lower, right? So if we want to make it lowercase, all right, and then there should equivalently be an upper method. So if I do dot tab, and then we've got this upper. All right, so there's a lot of different methods that you have available to you. I will kind of show you a few additional ones. So let me go up here and just redefine my string. Let's put some spaces at the beginning. So again, I'm going to restart and clear the outputs of that cell. And I'll do just a couple of spaces at the beginning and the end. All right, so now if I run my var, still a string. In this case, the capitalization, right? Notice that it failed right there because it's looking at that first character in the string, and it's going to capitalize it. Well, the first character is a space, so now it's all lowercase, right? If I were to do the lower and now the upper, right? And there is one other variant, I do believe, called title. So we can make a title case string, so it capitalizes the first letter in every word. But a lot of times if you're bringing down text from maybe the web or you're working with a file where maybe there's been human data entry, you might run into situations like this where maybe they've messed up and they've put different number of spaces at the beginning. So let's just show where this might really mess you up. Let's say that you're working with a company and you've got, maybe financial data. And so maybe you've got people manually entering in sales information, and they have to link that sales information to a customer, which might be indicated with a customer ID. So let's make 2 customer IDs. So let's do customer ID 1. And I'm going to say that that's going to be, let's do a string. Let's say it's going to be XO4761, and that's going to be their customer ID. And I'm going to make another variable with customer ID 2. But let's say that some individual, as they were entering that data, they accidentally hit the space bar at the end of it. All right, so if we visually look at those, right, if we were working with this in an Excel spreadsheet, we could probably say, well, it's the same customer. But here's the thing. From Python's perspective, if I use that double equal sign to make sure or to check for value equality, those things are not equal, right? That string XA4761 is different from this string that has that space at the end. All right, so this can be problematic, and this is where this next function that I'm going to show you, or this next method that we have available on strings, can be really helpful. So in particular, we're going to look at, if I were to take this customer ID 2, it's a string. If I were to do .tab, there's a method called strip. All right, and if you give it no input, what it will actually do is it's going to take whatever that string representation. So with no arguments in that string, it would just strip off any white space at the beginning or the end of that string. So now if I were to do customer ID 1, is that equal to the strip version of that string? Now we get that comparison is equal to true. Okay, so we can use, the strip command to strip off white space, and we can see, like in this case, what it would allow us to do is to strip off that beginning and ending white space by default. But you can use more advanced versions of this, right? So what if you had, what if you're downloading this data from some type of a database, and what it does is it might put in some, when it's, maybe bringing in certain formats or certain, entries, it puts a little header row. So it might do something like this. Maybe there's like a comment line. So I'm just going to make a comment variable, and it's like, okay, let's just do a bunch of different stars, and maybe job. So maybe you can, download from some system information on different jobs, and it puts a lot of stars at the front of it to indicate, oh, this is a new section for job 4761. All right, well, that's a little bit unfortunate, right? So maybe you just care about, this job, whatever that is, getting job 4761. You can also, in this case, so if I were to do comment.strip, right? So that's going to be exactly the same, because strip by default is only stripping white space, but you can provide characters to it. And what it will do is it will search from the beginning and the ending of those strings. And if it finds any of the characters that you provide, it will strip those off the beginning or end. Okay, so in this case, I'm doing this asterisk, and it strips that down. All right. I could even, let's say, what if there were some other weird characters in here? So I'm going to put some hyphens in here, right? And then so forth. All right, so I've got this really weird formatted string, and we know, maybe I don't know exactly what it's going to provide in there, but I do know the collection. It's either going to be asterisk or hyphen. Well, I can provide both of those, and it's still going to strip it. All right. Where this breaks, though, like if you have one character that's not in that list, the first time that it sees a character, so notice right here, I've just put a question mark. All right. Now, if I were to run that, it's able to strip all of that off the front end of the string. Okay. But as soon as and it's also looking from the right side of the string going towards the center. But as soon as it encounters a character that's not defined in that list, it's going to stop. All right. So in this case, it's going in from the right side towards the center. And when it encounters that question mark, that's not in your defined list. So it stopped and it said, hey, everything else is what you wanted. If you want to get rid of that, of course, there you go. All right, so that's a very, a method that we will see a lot, especially in future videos. I'm going to be looking at the pandas library. We'll be working with data And especially this is a very common need, especially if you're working with data that has manual entry. It's very common for people to maybe insert a space where they shouldn't have. So this strip command is very, very helpful. And then, of course, our casing commands are very, very helpful. Another thing that I do just want to go ahead and show you, because it is technically a string method, is this join. All right, so again, at this point, we haven't seen containers, but there is a very common container in Python that is a list. So I'm just going to make a thing called my list. And let's just say that this has a few different job numbers. So maybe, job, we capitalize that. So job, let's do 4761 again. Maybe we've got, job 5142. And then we've got job 8976. So maybe we've got some data processing pipeline. We're trying to find all jobs that are delinquent, and it goes through and it collects this list of these jobs. And maybe we want to get all of those jobs into one string, right? So in this case, I've got a list. If I would print that out, these are different objects. And again, we haven't seen list, or I haven't specifically covered list, but a list is just going to be a collection of different objects. So in this case, we've got 1, 2, 3 objects. Python starts indexing at 0. We'll talk about that more in the video on list. But the main thing to know at this time is we've got 3 different elements in this list, right? So if I print my list, right, these are 3 different things. It gives us back this representation. What if we wanted to combine those all together? What you can do is you can use a string method. Let me cut that cell. And you can say, like in this case, I want to define a string, and I'm going to put a comma, space. So I've got, single quotes, comma, space in those single quotes. So that's actually a string. That's interesting, right? So if I were to do a type on that, that's actually a string. And at this point, I'm just going to notice, because I've kind of, at this, just kind of recognize I'm using single quotes. I tend to use that when I'm defining strings. You can use double quotes as well. So that's perfectly valid. I just tend to like single quotes because I don't have to hold down the shift key. All right, so we can have single quotes as well. The only thing is, if you start with a single quote, you need to end the string with a single quote. You can't mix. Like in this case, I have a single and a double. That's going to throw an error, because it doesn't know. It says, hey, you start a string with a single, so it's looking to find the end of that string by another single quote. All right, so getting back, so we got this list. I've got now this string representation right here of just a comma. And what you can do, this is a string. So I actually have access to my string methods. And one of the methods on a string is called join. All right. And if I pass it an iterable of strings, that's going to be key. So all of these things are strings in my list. If I do this dot join, what it will do is it's actually now taking all of that and it's joining it together. So remember, if I were to print my list at this point, all right, so this is its representation. Now, if I print that expression we just had right here, just copying that. Right, so now it comes out with a cleaner representation. And the last thing I will show you, just to make this, hopefully drive this home a little bit more, if I look at the type of my list, right, so that's actually a list type, whereas if I were to do the type of that, it actually is returning a single string with whatever we have in this first little bit separating. So if I want to make this 2 hyphens, star, 2 hyphens, right, it's going to separate those as such. All right, so at this point, we've kind of looked at, basics of string, a couple of methods. I will kind of encourage you, if you want to see all the methods, so you can just go to the Python documentation. They have methods on strings. This will go through various examples of all of these. And whatnot. So this is actually for all of their built-in types. So if we look down here to this text sequence type in that left-hand selection over here, we can see that we've got string methods, right? And these are all those methods that we just saw, as well as that documentation. All right, so originally I thought I would discuss the print statement in this video, but I think I'm going to save that for another video to make this one just about working with string types. So that'll be it for this video, and then in a following video we will look more in depth into the print statement.